Hi guys, I'm Melinda with eatingbuckets.com, and today I'm going to talk with you about how to grow food that you can preserve to last throughout the year. This soil that you have to work with, combined with sun and water and some seeds, produces magic. I guarantee that at some point this year, while you are growing food, whether it's for the first time or the 50th, you're gonna have a moment where you jump up and down for joy because you just grew something that tasted so good and made you so happy. So it's a source of joy and it's a source of therapy, but more than anything, it's a source of nourishment for you and for your family. So a tiny bit about me. We live on a pretty small farm. It's like a homestead, farmstead, family farm in the Pacific Northwest. We've lived in this space for a little bit over 4 years, and during that time, we've managed to grow almost everything that our family needs to live off of throughout the year. But I didn't always live on a homestead. I sort of more used homesteading mentalities in smaller settings. And the thing that I want you to know when I talk through all of the spaces that I will today and all of the products that we create here is that you can do every single one in a small space. Whether it's an urban garden space, windowsill, balcony, you can take all these same principles and apply them to your particular situation. I want to talk about kind of the top 5 things that you can think of when you're approaching your garden and thinking of how to make it last throughout the year. Number 1, it is easier than you think. Don't be scared. Don't get intimidated. Keep that in mind. There are about 1 billion resources out there that will help you along the way, from textbooks, cookbooks, social media, websites. You are covered. So, number 2, when you're thinking about preserving, kind of different from gardening, but a marriage of the two, you think in terms of what do you go grocery shopping for? What does your family like to eat? And then you're going to make more of those items. Decide whether you are going to preserve just a little or a lot. And either of those decisions is totally fine for you. You just make that decision up front. Are you going to augment from your farmer's market, local grocery store, supermarket, or are you going to mainly pull from your harvest in the garden? You can think in terms of how might I create really cool, really tasty stuff that will last me throughout the year. Shelf-stable, dry goods, freezer items, dehydrated items, pickled items, sauces. It's like your gourmet delicatessen in your pantry. So when you're thinking about preserving food, you're bringing in sort of these really old-fashioned, like great-grandma lifestyle choices with modern-day techniques. So that's what I'm going to talk with you about. I'm going to talk specifically about the kinds of crops that you can look to. The short answer is everything. You can preserve everything. The longer answer is, let's look specifically to sort of the big ticket items, the fruiting varieties, and we'll go into all of those in more detail. So number 3 is know your zone. That's your planting zone. It's really important when you're talking about a harvest time that you're working toward, because that harvest time is like, think back on, any Laura Ingalls or Little House in the Big Woods, Little House on the Prairie books that you've read in the past, where everybody has a big canning season. That's what we talk about when we talk about the harvest season. So what you're doing when you look at your zone is you're looking specifically at when are most of your big ticket items going to come ready for harvest. So you can Google that. There's a lot of little zip code finders where you enter your zip code and it will tell you exactly what you can plant, at what time of year, and when it will be harvestable. Also look to all the backs of your seed packets. Those will absolutely explain step by step about how many days you can count on before your plants are ready to harvest. In that, and I will go into this later, look for determinate varieties rather than indeterminate varieties. Those are the varieties that you can count on being ready at a particular time. My growing season here in the Pacific Northwest tends to be fairly long because we're sort of mild here, but I also do have a pretty high peak in the summer with some hot days. It also means that I can extend my growing season well into winter by using hoop houses and high tunnels and greenhouses. Number 4, you need to decide on your main methods of preserving your food. Keeping in mind that some items just do that for themselves. Hardy winter squash, you need a cool, dry space to store those. Potatoes, you can store those in straw or newspaper. Same with onions. We'll talk more about that. But when you're talking about preserving fresh fruiting foods or greens or roots, you're looking at freezing, canning, pickling, fermenting, or dehydrating. So choose your methods ahead of time as best you can, and if you want to draw from all of those, that's fine. That's what we do. We do a little bit of all of those things, and then we have a variety of foods to choose from. Last but not least, when you're talking about food preservation, you need to look at the fact that rather than just gathering veggies and fruits from the garden as they ripen and become ready to use, you are actually growing more so that you can store them for the rest of the months of the year. So maybe you think of April to October as a growing season. So what you're going to preserve is going to cover you from November to March. So when you think about your grocery list or your garden planning, you're looking at how much does my family eat every month? On average, how can I grow enough of those items that I don't have to buy them at the store? So a good rule of thumb, but it's different for everyone, is to basically double what you would grow in your garden so that you have that extra amount to preserve. And we'll talk about how you can do that through succession planning, through bigger harvests of big ticket items, and more. Once again, as we step into all of these different segments throughout this tutorial, keep in mind it is easier than you think, and you've got this. Okay, so when we talk about the big crops that you have to put a lot of energy into because they produce once per year, we're talking about our fruits. We're talking about our tomatoes, cucumbers, squashes like zucchinis, yellow squash, hardy winter squashes. We're talking about our blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, boysenberries, plums, peaches. Am I making you hungry? Because just talking about it, I want you to start to imagine all of these things a la mode. I want you to picture this entire stand of blackberries dripping with whipped cream, or blended into your favorite ice cream maker, or put into the best freezer jam that you have ever tried in your entire existence. I want you to imagine that all of this stuff just looks like brambles to most people, but to me it looks like gold, right? Because what I do is I pull all of these blackberries off and I freeze them and I make jams out of them. I make ice cream, I make cobbler, I make pies. So when you're talking about preserving your food, there's going to be a combination of things that are sort of just given to you through the goodness of nature. Your blackberries. Chances are, if you don't have blackberries in your yard, there's going to be a park nearby or someplace, a trail where you can go harvest those berries. Look to what wilderness provides, and then you can put your energy into like the big sort of royalty crops in your garden. Now, don't forget about your orchard here, and we gather the apples when they're ready to pick, and if we miss any and they fall on the ground, we pick those up too, and we just peel them and we freeze them. I call it fallen apple pie. It's absolutely delicious. There's nothing wrong with eating apples off of the ground, despite a lot of contrary claims. What you do is you peel it and you cook it, and it's fine. You don't eat it raw. You don't pull it off of the ground and eat it raw. But you peel and you freeze it, or you peel and cook it. If you are working in a small space and you want to have an orchard, you can have an orchard. Those apple trees don't need to be mammoth to produce mammoth amounts of fruit. We have a couple examples right here of basically column apples or pole apples. These are high production variety apples that you can grow in containers. They're dwarf apple varieties so that they're easy to pick from, and they're high yield, high production apple trees. What I think of as the big worker crops that you have to really kind of stress over a little bit because they're delicious and you want them. And those for me are tomatoes. Tomatoes take all of my mama worry kind of all year long. I love them, but I always want them to grow, and thankfully they always do. This year we're growing about 70 or 80 tomato plants. And the reason that I do that is because, like I said, tomatoes are the source of all our sort of favorite meals. We're talking Italian, lasagna, spaghettis, tomato soup, like it's just a really simple tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich, salsas, and so what I do is I freeze them, I can them, and I dry them. So come on over. I think this might be closer to 70 tomato starts, and about 45 of them are San Marzanos. Those are a paste tomato. You can also go with Aroma. San Marzanos tend to be a little bit bigger than Aroma. They full on best sauce tomato that you can find. And the reason that you want to grow a San Marzano if you're wanting to preserve your tomatoes is because they are a paste tomato. They aren't a juicy tomato. Whereas, for example, I also am growing some of these little cherry sun gold tomatoes. I'm going to use those in a little bit more of a shadier spot, I think in our kitchen garden out front. And those will produce pretty quickly. We'll probably have a harvest by August. I'll use them in fresh salsas and salads and, just kind of like eat off the vine. Whereas the San Marzanos, they are a determinate tomato variety. What the determinate tomato variety basically means is that it's all going to come to harvest around the same time. And that's when you're going to get out your canning and your, vacuum sealer and your dehydrator and your pickling equipment for whatever you want to do with your tomato sauces. I'll be sharing tons of tomato sauce recipes, salsa recipes, canning recipes, and freezer recipes. So you can follow along if you want to. Paste tomatoes for salsas and sauces, and determinate for a set harvest time versus indeterminate. And then also looking at sort of what kind of environment do you have to work with? Is it shadier and sunnier? And should you, do some cherry tomatoes because they require a little bit less sun output? This is a San Marzano. Shiny, big, giant paste tomato. Don't forget about your heirloom varieties as well. Those will be your summer slicers. This was 1 tomato. I think it was about 5 pounds. Cucumbers, dill, and fresh herbs will form the backbone of your amazing homemade pickles that you will pull out all year long. Don't forget about your zucchinis and yellow squash and your peppers. Those will provide endless amounts of soup that you can cook, freeze, and bring out all year long. Obviously, when we're talking about chili peppers and herbs and amendments, those will go into your sauces, your salsas, and you can just freeze them and pull them out and add them to your sauces throughout the year. Cooking with tomatoes and these fruited vegetables is super fun to do with your entire family, and it will be memories that you will build with your children forever. So one of the ways that I like to approach food preservation or thinking about how to save your food for the future is kind of like divided into these categories. We've talked about the fruits, the true fruits, the stone fruits, your tomatoes, your cucumbers, your squashes. All of those really are sort of a one big push kind of crop, which is why it's kind of important that you nail those. Now, there's some other things that are a little bit more passive. Potatoes. What you need to do is get them in the soil, and you need to hill up around them periodically, but they kind of take care of themselves. They're a really beautiful crop that way. And you don't want to miss out on the benefits of that starchy, full-fledged, mineral-rich, vitamin-rich amendment to your food. When you're talking about space and how much space you have to work with, I want to show you that I have 200 potatoes. That's 200 potatoes that are going to each produce about 10 potatoes each. And it's in about a 10 by 10 space. You can grow potatoes in a tunnel, like a little, You can do it in a trash bin. You can do it in a burlap bag. You can do it in a small little area in your yard of straw. You can just grab some soil and do it there. Grow some potatoes. You will be so thrilled that you did. Okay? And it doesn't take much space. It takes very little energy. The biggest energy output is in planting them and then going out and harvesting them. The rest of the time they just grow. They want to grow. In general, everything wants to grow. I'm just going to hill around them as they get tall enough, and you can follow along with me and I'll show you how I do that. Okay, the other thing I want to talk with you about, since it's right here too, are herbs. When you think about the most expensive thing that you're going to find at the grocery store in terms of produce, it's usually herbs. Think of those like little clamshell herbs that you might get around Thanksgiving time with like everything that you're going to throw into your turkey or your stuffing. You can grow all of that. You can grow so much more for so much less. Think about getting a seed packet for about $2, and it's going to produce 10 to 50 plants. So when you want that stuff to last throughout the year, when it comes to herbs, there's a couple really significant ways that you can use those herbs. You can cut them, puree them, and put them in ice cube canisters in your freezer and pull them out throughout the year. Just toss an ice cube of parsley into your soup and immediate flavor. You can make a pesto and freeze that. You can dry all of this and use it just as you would your favorite dried herbs. For your chives, same thing. You can cut, chop, freeze. You can cut, chop, dry. You can add to any of your favorite sauces, and you'll still benefit from those throughout the year. You can also do a little hoop house over a lot of your, depending on your climate, over a lot of your herbs and use those throughout the year. One of the things that I tend to really think about with my herbs is, what am I going to be canning? So I always have dill growing for my pickles, and I always have parsley and oregano for my tomato sauces. And I always have chives and celery for all of my soups, and I always grow cilantro and onions for my salsas, so that everything has this sort of like little world where they all communicate, right? I've got my peppers, which communicate with my tomatoes, which communicate with my Italian seasonings and my Mexican seasonings. And those little worlds are like little preserving islands for me. So in this space, it's basically a triangle. So it's about 5 feet by 5 feet. It's not that much space. What I'm doing is I'm planting my onions as close together as they can be. These were all planted from starts. It's about 200 starts in here. I also have 300 or 400 onions that I planted from seed. The reason that I plant so many onions in our garden is really simple. Number one, they taste better than anything you can buy at the store. Number one, flavor. Number two, I use them for everything. Nearly every meal that we make starts with olive oil, garlic, and an onion. Whether it's a soup, a sauce, a sauté, a casserole, it's a staple. So because onions are a staple for us, I plant them every year, and I've continuously planted them, and I keep planting more because I use more and more. I also use them for my pickles. I use them for my ferments. Like, they're in everything. And finally, because we're coming to the end of this tutorial, your greens, your brassicas, your hardy greens and veggies, and your roots, okay? So here is a great example of a plant that keeps on giving. This has been planted for over a year. It's Russian kale. It is flowering right now. I'm going to trim all of these flowers off and cook them up like I would a broccolini in a sauté or soup. Totally delicious. These flowers I will use in our salads. All of these greens can then be harvested, chopped, and frozen for all of my soups, all of my sauces, all of my casserole amendments. So keep growing your greens. Keep pulling them, growing them, pulling them, growing them. I let these ones totally go because I want a little section of the garden that's just constantly producing seeds and self-seeding. It's almost like a food forest, right? But I am gonna grow a ton of kale and cut and freeze, cut and freeze, cut and freeze, and harvest throughout the year. And you can do that with all of your greens. Your lettuces as well, but those aren't going to be able to, like, you can't freeze them for the winter. So those are things that you're going to enjoy and do succession planting for, so that you can eat them throughout the summer and well into the fall. And in your hoop houses, you'll be able to enjoy them, especially a more hardy lettuce like a romaine. Succession planting, or planting multiple times throughout the growing season, is how you guarantee that you have plenty of your roots, your beets, radishes, turnips, carrots, and your hardy greens, kales, chards, arugulas, spinaches, and your brassicas, cabbages, cauliflower, broccolis, that you can then gather, freeze, and can for use throughout the year. For your root veggies, focus on succession planting for those as well. As we said before, succession planting just simply means that you plant things successively. So instead of just putting all your beets in the ground and calling it good and pulling them up and being careful about how many you eat at a time, plant a bunch, 10 days later plant a few more. Look online at all of your zone requirements for when to grow your green leafies and your roots, because that's going to really help guide you for how you plan on growing each of those items. But think in terms of using a seed packet through the long term, through the growing season, where you plant all of your greens and you harvest and you plant more, and you harvest and you plant more, and you harvest and you plant more. That will give you a ton more fresh leafies, but it will also give you more that you can chop and freeze, or chop and can. Same with your turnips and your beets and your radishes. Those you can plant successively throughout the year for months at a time, and you'll get a much bigger harvest. Last but not least, don't forget about your peas and beans. I want to show you a fairly small space. I would say that is about 6 by 2 and 6 by 3. In these 2 beds, I have 200 pea plants. From these, I'm going to harvest a ton and I'm going to freeze them. I'm going to eat them fresh. I will also plant another succession of these pea plants for a fall harvest. So I will have 2 different harvests of these peas. Same with your beans. I don't have my beans planted yet because we're not quite there in zone 8B. I am going to plant those most likely in June, along with my cucumbers, zucchinis, summer squash, hardy squash, and tomatoes. So look really carefully at what you love to eat, what you would like to try eating, and then how you might be able to extend those growing seasons and preserve from each crop something that you can pull out throughout the winter months, or the hunger months as they sometimes call them, and enjoy like a touch of spring, a touch of summer, a big taste of fall. So if you have any questions at all about anything that I've covered today, it's kind of like a quick run through of a really big topic. Reach out anytime. I love having people ask questions. I love finding new community. I love making new best friends. I swear that's one of the most beautiful things about finding these connections through food. We are all connected in our desire to live well, to live sustainably, and to grow the best food that we can grow. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, on Pinterest. I'm actually pinning a ton of stuff all the time from lots of other resources, especially focused on small space gardening. It's a passion of mine, so you can look at my Pinterest boards for that. I'm on YouTube, and you can reach out any of those places, message me, comment on any posts that you're curious about, and I will get back to you very quickly. I can't wait to connect with you. Thank you so much. Bye.